Hi there, my name is Charlotte and welcome to the Oxbridge Formula. Today we have with us Lee, who is a second year engineer at Trinity College, Cambridge. Lee, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
So just before we get started, I want to remind you all that here at the Oxbridge Formula, we offer a variety of in-depth online and interactive courses to best prepare you for Oxbridge tests and admissions, which we will be talking about in a second. For more information on our online video solutions, the link will be in the description down below. Today we're going to dive into what the life of a Cambridge engineer is actually like, peel back the secrets, and ask all the questions you've wanted to know. So, Lee, tell me a bit about your application experience. Cast your mind back to young year 12, year 13 you. How did you first start thinking of Oxbridge?
So I'm an international student. I applied from Singapore, but I did my A-levels in Singapore. So my procedure was more or less the same as whatever you go through in the UK. You know, you do the COPA, you send in your testimonials and your score, so on and so forth. And I take the interview more or less just the same, albeit at a different time. So normally, you know, you have the pre-interview test and then you have the interview. It just so happened that my interview was before my pre-interview test.
And is
So
that
it's kind of
because you were
confusing.
international, or was that?
Yes, so they fly someone down and then they question you.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's quite stressful.
Right.
But I think like it was interesting to see that my process of application was more or less the same as whatever home students would go through. Maybe the timeline is just a bit more jumbled, but you know, the steps are all there. Yeah.
Nice. And so did you always know you wanted to apply to Cambridge? Just before we get into what Cambridge admissions was like, was there ever a choice between Oxford and Cambridge engineering?
I think so. There was a point in time where I was just looking at all the overseas universities that were better than whatever we have in Singapore. And you know, that narrows that down to you know, like three. You've got Imperial, Oxford, and Cambridge. And I visited all three schools before. I was fortunate enough to come on like holiday, take a look at the campuses. But Oxford and Cambridge were a very close tie. And you know, like at the end of the day, for me, it was, I guess it boiled down to experience, right? Because I only have 4 years, you know, in the UK. So I wanted more of a change of environment. Like I've been growing up in like a city most of my life. So that really rules out, you know, Imperial, and Oxford has like the big city vibes. But Cambridge gives me that like, you know, the middle age, medieval falling apart kind of, you know, aura. So I was like, you know what, I'll just go with that.
No,
and I applied to Cambridge. Yeah.
fantastic. No, it's so interesting to hear that it was so based in location, your choice. Were there any aspects of the course as well that were different that you preferred, say, at Cambridge rather than Oxford?
Also, I've heard that the I can't speak for everybody, but most of my friends who've been through Cambridge engineering generally spoke of it more fondly than people who have been through Oxford engineering. But that's just my personal experience. That's just based off my personal experience. Another main draw of like Oxbridge as opposed to somewhere say like Imperial is the fact that you only specialize in your third year. At least for Cambridge, you know, we specialize in third year. So you really get to experience the full suite of engineering modules, and then you make an informed decision. So that's the upside. The downside is that you have to do the papers that you're bad at also on top of whatever you're good at. So that's not very enjoyable. I mean, if you know that, you know, if you know exactly what direction you're headed and what specialization you want to, you know, really specialize in, for lack of a better word, you know, by all means go for a specialized engineering course. But I don't think it's exactly fair to expect all year 13 students to know exactly where they want to be, you know, 10, 20 years down the road. So I feel that, you know, the more general approach that Cambridge took was just more appealing than whatever Imperial was offering.
Nice.
Yeah.
And how about Oxford versus Cambridge? Were there many differences there, or do they offer sort of the same thing, would you say?
Okay, that one, I can't quite recall the exact details. I remember doing another comparison of the two also, but I think end of the day, you know, the deal breaker for me at least was more so the environment more than the course. I think Oxford's courses are also very, very versatile in that aspect. But let's be honest, you know, most of the time when you pick a university course, the course is only one aspect of it. You know, there's so much more than your course that contributes to the university experience. So if I were to like give, you know, a prospective Oxbridge student a piece of advice, I don't think everybody is as fortunate as me to be able to visit both places, especially as an international student. But if you can, you know, visit both and see which one you really like vibe with the most, I'd say that's the most, you know, that's probably the most straightforward way to get to know if you like the university.
Nice.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, thank you. No, absolutely. So you've chosen Cambridge, you're selling your choice,
Yeah.
and you've applied. It's so interesting to hear that you did the interview before the exam. Is that the way around you would have liked to do it, preferably?
I think so, because I felt I did well in the interview.
For more information on Oxbridge colleges, subjects, and to get help with the application process, visit oxbridgeformula.co.uk. Click subscribe and ring the notification icon to be notified when we release new content.
But I felt terrible after my paper. Like I left one third of the questions blank, and I guessed another like third of it. So like 33%, I was very certain, but the other like 67, I was just, yeah, you know what? That's done. Let's be off of that.
Like I do humanities, and even I know not a great ratio. Nope,
not at all.
So but you felt the interview went well, at least. What was the interview like for engineering?
So I was quite surprised by the format of the Cambridge interview, at least. I heard it'd be a bit like rigorous. I just didn't expect it to be that rigorous. When I started preparing for interviews, especially with with the Imperial interview, you normally think of questions like, why did you choose to study engineering?
Mm-hmm.
Or, what do you plan to do as an engineer? That kind of thing. So I really thought about those questions. And then I remember walking into my Cambridge interview, and it was just a professor with a stack of papers. And it was like, okay, I'm going to write out a math question for you. I would like you to attempt it. And I was completely caught off guard. I was totally blindsided. I thought, it'd be a bit more like academics based, but I didn't think it'd be like a topical test that's being marked in front of you.
Wow.
So that kind of threw me off a bit. But I think my main takeaway from the whole interview, I did not answer every question he asked. In fact, I was stuck for most of them. But I would say that about halfway through the interview, I really realized what he was looking out for. The questions, at least for me, were completely out of the Singaporean A-level syllabus. And I think I mentioned that to him quite a few times. And he was like, yeah, okay, cool, we're aware. And I think that was an obvious hint that they wanted to see how you could think out of the box, right? And how you can draw connections with the things you use in your day-to-day lives. So that was pretty interesting for me. And then, from that moment on, I was just way more relaxed because I realized that I didn't actually have to answer the questions correctly. I just had to show that I was trying to think.
No, that's so interesting. Yeah, they wanted to see your process more so than anything you actually knew, and were specifically asking you things you didn't know. As terrifying as I'm sure that must have been, to be faced with
At least I made it out.
Do you remember what sort of topics they were asking you about?
Oh yeah, so there was I think there was a question on springs. So he drew a simple spring circuit, and then he asked me so if the stiffness of the spring is, let's say, K, what would the stiffness be if I connected it in this situation? And then it's not really a topic that I prepared for. But then he said that, oh, you can actually use a circuit analogy, but it's not quite the same. So it's kind of like the inverse. So if you connect springs in series, it behaves as if they were resistances in parallel. And then if you connected springs in parallel, they would behave as if they were resistors in series. And I remember reading that in some science magazine from year 10 or something. And I told him about that. And I think he really liked that. He was like, yeah,
nice.
That's what I'm trying to get at. So I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. And then he was like, oh, I don't actually want to see the answer. I just want to see the thought process. We can move on to the next question. So I thought that was really chill. And then there's some basic reasoning questions. He drew out this grid, and then he said okay, say I were to start on this point here. What's the shortest path I can take to that point there? So it's a 2D grid, right? And then I just tried to rationalize it, and then I explained it to him. And they say, okay, that's good rationalization, but that's not the right answer. And so I'm pretty sure with your way of thinking, if I told you the answer, you'd be really pissed. And he kind of just turned it into a joke. And he was like, in fact, the solution is so simple. If you were a kindergartner, you'd be able to figure it out. It's just that, school really trains you to think within these, fixed dimensions that, you don't see the answer. So he takes the paper and he folds it up. And he's like, you can see that's a lot more straightforward now. I was like, yeah, damn, cool.
So
it's really interesting.
As well as an interview.
Yeah, basically that. So I really think what they're looking out for, it's not, that final answer. It's just how you deal with stress. and how you come to conclusions. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, even if you answered something wrongly, it wouldn't really bug them. I guess the main point is just show them at least your thought process. And if your logic is correct or incorrect, to try to steer you on the right path. It's really the thought process that counts.
Yeah, no, advice that we hear a lot for interviews is, you've got to think out loud. You've got to talk through what you're doing. Would you say that's true? Is that helpful advice to give?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I was keeping it in my head for like the first question, and I looked at him and I was like, you know what, I'm stuck. And I was like, okay, maybe you run through me your thinking. And I was like, okay, that's when I knew I had to like, just say every step out.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned like, a lot of doing well at interview is like stress management, basically. It's a process, but it's keeping it cool. How were you feeling before the interview?
Oh, I was stressed. Yeah, I was really, really stressed. I didn't really know what to expect because I read from like forums that, the Oxbridge interviews are a bit different from what you normally expect from a UK university interview. And yeah, like, you can go in with all of these, answers prepared, but until you sit down and they show you that math question, you really, really can't know what to expect.
No,
so yeah, like I wouldn't say, don't prepare for the interview at all. Have some points on hand that you want to talk about. But I feel that it seems like they can get a good understanding of you from, your personal statement already, right? And, if you're applying for a course like engineering or any other STEM subject, if you're not mentioning why you want to do that subject in your personal statement, you're probably writing it wrong.
No,
so yeah, so like, there's no point for them asking you something that they already know, right? So if anything, my approach was that I wanted to be really, really honest in my personal statement, such that I had, I guess the more solid your personal statement is, the better you can answer personal questions during the interview. Yeah, like your story has to follow through, from start to finish. So that was really what I was preparing for. But that's another advantage of a strong personal statement on hindsight, the fact that they didn't really ask me personal questions and they went straight to like academic questions. I kind of feel that was what gave me a leg up compared to people who didn't really think through their personal statements in great detail. I can't say definitively that's what got me in, but, looking at it on hindsight and the way that the whole interview process was structured, I think that was what they were trying to get at.
Nice. Yeah. No, that's so interesting you bring up like the importance of a personal statement. I think sometimes when people are doing the STEM subjects, there's the attitude that, the weighting is all in the exam and the interview, and the statement's just like, oh, you're a person and you can write words and string sentences together. Well done. What are some like hot tips you'd give for writing an engineering personal statement? You mentioned like telling a story through it. Can you explain that a bit?
So I think this actually applies to degrees in general. Like the way I was taught to write personal statements, or at least the tips that I use, from my teachers, from my parents, both my parents studied overseas, so they had like more than enough experience writing personal statements. So the insight that I got from them, I feel can be applied like across the board. It's not engineering specific, but the bottom line is, if you have no interest in a course and you're doing it, for example, just for the money only or for the career prospects, no amount of fluff in your personal statement can cover up for the truth. So, if you want to write a genuine personal statement, it starts with genuine interest in the course. So I guess that's really the first question, you need to ask yourself, what do you want to study and why? Engineering wasn't exactly like a clear choice for me. In Singapore, like we talk about like the few big subjects like law and medicine, and dentistry, that kind of thing, where the money is at, right? And that's where most, I would say, conservative students would choose to go to the safer option. And I would say engineering is also quite a safe option, but the way I ended up there wasn't really through like the money or the career security route. It was just more sort of like, taking stock of where I'm at, right? I'm good at physics. I'm quite interested in physics, but I don't want to do like theory stuff, formulas bore me. I actually want to make things, right? And there are a lot of aspects that I could branch out to as a maker. You could be a researcher, for example. There's a lot of hands-on work, right? You don't just have to do, pure theory, or you could do engineering. So I asked around, looked at the course outlines, that kind of thing. And then I settled on engineering. So, you should still follow, through with your due diligence, do your research, ask your seniors. But before you even do all of that, I guess it starts off by asking yourself, why do I want to do this?
Yeah.
And it really adds like that touch of I would say like that human touch, to your personal statement. right? Because if you look at most sample personal statements online, those templates, they're all very sterile. There's nothing unique about them. And they all follow a certain structure, right? And, the first thing I told myself is that if everyone's submitting a model personal statement, automatically that becomes boring. So the first thing I did was, just throw the structure out of the window. Who really needs, clear content points when there's a story that's easily followed, right? So you need to make sense from start to finish, obviously, and you need to finish up with a message you're sending. But how you get there really doesn't matter. You don't need like 5 paragraphs in between, that kind of thing. Go where your heart tells you, is what I say. And I think that's that might be a very Singaporean thing. Like the way we approach things are very systematic, right? We have a formula and we follow through with that. And I think that's how I got a leg up from all of my peers. They followed whatever my sixth form told them. This is how you should write a personal statement. These are the paragraphs you need. This is the evidence you need to support it. Whereas for me, I was just like, you know what? Let's just go with it. I'm just going to write what I want to write.
Yeah.
And, be as much as I can be on that piece of paper, since they're not going to meet me in person before the interview. I want that 2-3 paragraphs to show who I really am as a person, more so than my accomplishments. I didn't really bring in things like grades or, academic achievements, because, they can see that through your A-level cert. You don't need to tell people you're driven or diligent if you have straight A's for the A-levels. It shows, it really shows. But, if there's better things you could spend the word count telling people about yourself, I would very much do that. Right? What are your hobbies? How does the course of choice link to you as a person, right? Like I made it very clear that I was a maker. I like to build stuff, be it Lego from when I was young. I'm actually a performing magician. So, I build my own props, that kind of thing. I love mechanical stuff, right? And I made sure to fully geek out because that's who I am. I'm literally in it for the technicalities, and the rigor of it all. There's nothing to do with my future here. I'm just interested. And I'm just here to see where it goes and where this takes me. So I think it really helps to have a more personal touch to the whole personal statement in general. That's why it's a personal statement. But I think a lot of people forget to see that.
No, absolutely. I think, the word personal along with the statement can get so lost sometimes. Because it is so easy to try and think, look, I need to hit all of these different points.
Correct.
And then I'll get in. No. And if you listening would like some examples of actual successful Oxford and Cambridge personal statements, with, a variety of styles that you've seen, we do have them available on our website, the Oxbridge Formula, and in our book, the Oxbridge Formula, which you can find linked in the description down below. So in your personal statement, how did you show your passion for engineering? You mentioned the Lego and the magic, which is great. I can't imagine they read many magicians' personal statements that year.
Yeah, I think that's the cool part because, most people applying to Oxbridge, you've met a certain academic criterion, right? So if you bank on that academic accomplishment to show who you are as a person, you'll be the same as most of the applicants because that's a common point. So I feel it really helps to tap on something that, people don't really have, right? And that's through your hobbies, be it through your hobbies or be it through your experiences growing up, right? That's why I think that's really what they want to see, that sense of individuality and drive. The way I did it, at least, I straight up mentioned my hobbies, right? I was like, from young, I love to build things. And that was a very nice lead-in. And that's what I mean by story, right? It really helps to have an image of who you are as a person in your head. I'm not saying, conjure up an ideal candidate because they'll be able to tell when you're faking, right? There's no instance you should lie, but there are definitely many instances where you should enhance certain characteristics that you think they're looking out for. Right.
Give yourself
so if you
that
think
superhero origin story, show how you went from.
Yeah, basically, yeah. No, but it's very clear that they're looking out for certain things, right? They want you to be creative, to show that you're able to break the mold, and on top of course, being, academically strong, you need to show that you're able to step out of the box and look past the formulas because most of the time, engineering really isn't about the formulas. Calculation can get you to an answer, but there's so many uncertainties to that final answer. Like, for example, if I were to build a bridge, I could just draw out a simplified model of a bridge and calculate all the forces within the trusses and tell you what kind of materials you would need to build them. But that wouldn't account for the fact that, if I were to put the bridge in the open and be exposed to the elements, the sun, the environment, and then all these elements of failure, so it's really not about the formula. It's really about that multi-pronged approach, right? So back to the bridge, it's not just about structural design. It's about materials engineering, right? It's also a bit about thermofluids, thermodynamics to see how, the metal responds to heat and light, that kind of thing. So I think it's just the general approach of thinking that they're really looking out for. The fact that you can tackle a problem from multiple perspectives, and the fact that you're not held by a single mold. And I think that also speaks volumes to the reason why they've organized their course so, flexibly. So you can get as most out of it, as general as possible. Sorry, as general of an education as possible before you decide to specialize. So you see where you get to fit in the grand scheme of things first, and then find, the silo that you want to dive into.
Nice. Yeah, I promise we will get to talking about the specialism soon. But yes, so you've done your interview, you've done your personal statement, you're on fire, you're midway through your application, and then the entrance exam, the ENGAA. Tell me about it. What was your experience like?
It wasn't great. I remember walking out of the ENGAA and telling myself, yep, that's it. It's been fun. I made it through this far. It's been a cool ride.
Back to magic.
Yeah, back to... But really, ENGAA didn't feel great at all. It felt like there were too many questions for the time limit. I remember doing a sample test just before going in. I thought to myself, I'm screwed. There are sample papers out there. There are sample questions out there, but nothing quite prepares you for the situation where you're faced with more questions you'll be able to answer. Especially in a short period of time, you really, really feel the time pressure. And I think that's what they're kind of testing. Because in the A-levels, right, the time for the exam is fair. Most people will be able to answer those questions within a given period of time. But I felt that with the ENGAA, they really wanted to put you under the time pressure. So they gave more questions than necessary. And I think that was the general consensus of ENGAA candidates when I walked out of the exam hall and I realized that I wasn't the only one that didn't answer more than half of the paper properly.
At least.
Right? Yeah. So I remember I more or less predicted that I wouldn't be able to finish the paper. So I told myself, for the first half of the time, I was going to take it seriously and get as many questions correct as possible. And then that plan kind of fell apart halfway. I was like, you know what, screw this. I'm just going to go ahead and try to wing as many as I can.
Nice.
So I literally just flew through. Yeah, I just flew through the whole paper. Those questions I was confident of answering, I actually tried to get a correct answer. And those that I wasn't so confident of answering, I didn't waste time doing very detailed calculations, just throw in some ballpark figures, give good estimates, and then find something that's within the order of magnitude and then shade that over and move on, And despite that, I still didn't finish the paper. So that should speak volumes as to how many questions there were. But yeah, I would say, looking back at the whole applications procedure, ENGAA isn't the be all and end all. I'm certain that there are people who fared better in the ENGAA than I did. But like I mentioned in the interview, right, it's really not the ability for you to answer every question correctly. It's more so how you deal with it, the stress of answering questions.
There you go.
So I really, really think the ENGAA was designed to not be completed. If the top scholars in Singapore can say that, I didn't finish the paper and I didn't feel confident about more than half of the questions I answered, I don't think that paper was meant to be finished.
Well, that's probably very reassuring for people doing past papers right now, gearing up for it, going, I'm screwed. This is unanswered.
Yeah.
Is that what you'd recommend then? Going in with the mindset of, I'm probably not going to finish this. Do what you can and do it well. Do you think that worked?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm certain that there are very gifted individuals out there who'd be able to finish it off. I wouldn't be surprised after seeing the people in Cambridge. I really wouldn't be surprised that some of them actually finished the ENGAA.
Crumbs.
But I would say that I'm a normal guy. I'm not super intelligent or anything, especially compared to a lot of my peers. I would admit defeat. But I think if you wanted to be really smart about it and you know where your academic caliber is, right? It's really just make the most of whatever little time you have. Be smart about it. If you feel like you're spending too much time on a question, move on. It's basically the same approach you would have to your A levels, right? If there was a question that would stump you for more time than required, you save the marks. You move on and try to save as much as you can later on than spending all the time on that one question and ending up, ruining the rest of the paper. So yeah, like the more prepared you are to deal with time pressure, I think the better you will do.
Nice. No, that's really good advice. Excellent.
Of course, it helps to get practice. Of course,
Absolutely,
it helps to get practice. Like if you can practice to the point that you can finish the ENGAA, by all means do that. But for me, that just wasn't the case. So I just took the same approach like I did to my A levels, minimize my losses, and then move on.
Nice. Yeah. Are there any questions in particular that have stuck with you even now, like 2-3 years later?
Oh no, I think that was a good spread. They were more or less A-level standards. I'm not too sure how the standards differ between countries, but I think if you sat for an A-level physics paper, you'd be more or less equipped to deal with the ENGAA. So they did feel like they were about the same standards, if not maybe a bit trickier, requiring a bit more thought. But nothing you can't answer if you put a bit of brain power to it. Once again, though, the issue is time. So the longer you spend thinking about a question, the more likely it is that you wouldn't have time for the rest of the questions.
Yeah.
So like there just came a point in time where I was like, I think I might know how to do this, but I'm pretty certain that there's a question somewhere down the road where I would instantly know the answer, with just a few punches of the calculator. So I would like circle that question or star it and then move on. And then when I finish all of those, guaranteed questions, I move back to those that I start and then like put a bit more thought into it and then try to get the answers that I could.
Nice.
And then
you got to ration that brain power.
Of course, yeah. And then like the last couple of minutes where you're like, you know what, I don't think I have enough time to think about one tough question. So I just spend the rest of my time like randomly shading ovals and just, putting my best guess really.
Fair
to
enough.
answer as many questions as you can. Yeah.
Bam, great advice. Yeah. So what A levels did you do? Sorry, you did physics?
I did physics, chemistry, mathematics, economics. Yeah.
Crumbs, yeah. Which do you think of those? So the ENGAA, engineering exam, do you think it was more sort of physics or maths based, would you say?
So the split was quite even. It did feel like they were testing a good variety of both physics, calculations, and mathematical skills. And you kind of feel that's the case also in Cambridge. Like physics and math kind of become like the same subject in the engineering course. So you learn all these physical concepts, but what's driving all these concepts are your mathematical calculations. So the math course is more of a supporting course that allows you to better understand the theoretical calculations that go behind your physics work.
Nice.
So it's quite interesting to see it that way rather than two completely separate papers. Like at the A levels, like you don't just learn integration for integration's sake. You're actually learning integration for like, electronic calculations, for example, things like that. Like you can actually see it being put to use, which is cool. And I think that was really the message they were trying to send with the ENGAA, that both are equally important. So yeah, revise both, essentially.
Nice. Always a great advice. Revise. So you mentioned that like at the Cambridge course, there's a real overlap between the maths and the physics. Is that something you enjoy, like bringing those two together?
It's enjoyable when it comes to the subjects I'm good at, like for electronics. But like for like the subjects I'm bad at, like materials or like thermodynamics, I absolutely hate it. Like when you've got to do.
What's so hard about it?
It's just tedious, right? Like, and then there comes a point where like you can appreciate the practical use behind it, but when you look at a question and you just see that it's very clear that it's just an exercise in integration, with a nice like physical like physics hat put on it, right? Like this is a physics question, but it's a math question at the end of the day. So I didn't really quite enjoy that like pure calculations aspect to it. But that being said, math does set the groundwork for you to really understand practical calculations, because most of the time, your theoretical calculations will fail you. That's why you put on that margin of error. But to even get to the point where you put on the margin of error requires some sort of mathematical like prowess. So, as boring as, integrating a 15-part problem might be, it's still necessary sometimes. I mean, you do have computers to do that for you, but you owe it to yourself as an engineer to be able to say, okay, if I don't have a calculator, I can get down and dirty and do it myself.
There you go. Bring it back to basics. Actually do the maths. Huge.
No, but that's really the intersection between the two. Like math just forms the basis to all of physics, right? And as to whether I enjoy it or not, it's really a question of whether I enjoy the paper, like the physics paper in itself. So for things like, materials or thermofluids, I mean, they're interesting, but I don't see myself doing that for the rest of my career.
Yeah.
Right? So it's cool, but yeah. Sorry.
Nice. Sorry, I was going to ask, what would you say your favorite part of the course is then?
Oh, I really, really like electronics. So like digital circuitry, I meant information. So like, I would say the two are quite closely related. So for the uninitiated, information engineering is just literally about making sense of the world. Whether something is stable or unstable, you can actually calculate that. It's really cool. It's basically just a mathematical interpretation of systems, right? And once you can understand the math, you can build your own systems. Nice. So it's pretty nifty. Like you learn how to like take signals, like from an input physical source, let's say a sound recording, right? And how you can like decode that into an output, that kind of thing. So it really shows the flow of information, right? And for me, like the connection that has to electronics is that most of the time, electronics are what drives these conversion processes. So for example, from a digital analog converter, you've got a lot of wiring, a lot of logic gates, and hardware that's going behind that. So that really forms a nice link between the two. Like the converter isn't just like a cool box that takes something and outputs something. You can actually see how to build it. Nice. And I think the two fields are really closely related, as with many other fields in engineering. But it's really about finding your niche, right? And like, I would say that's the best part about the course, the fact that it's so diverse. It really allows you to find, what areas that you're really comfortable in. I actually kind of wanted to do a bit of like computing and information, like coding, after like 2 years of coding courses, I realized I hate coding with a passion. Like, I mean, it's fun when you do a project, right? And then you debug it. And then when it actually runs, it's so satisfying.
There you go. Well, when it actually
I personally can't see, when it runs, yeah. But I personally can't see myself spending the rest of my life debugging code.
But that's great. And Cambridge let you like explore that, and you can do it for 2 years.
Yeah, of course.
No.
Yeah, and like I personally thought that like, computing was like the way to the future, right? That building and making would be digital, and that automation would take over most of our physical production. But I feel my perceptions really changed when like they assigned us this integrated project where you have like different fields of like engineering coming together, and you were assigned one of the fields. And I put myself down for electronics, and like I was taught how to like make hardware, like you solder stuff, use things like Hellman sleeves, and then they let you play these wires and everything, and it was so fun. So like I would build these like sensor circuits, right? And then you put them on your robot, the robot would move, and then the circuit would break because of a weak link or something. And then you would learn how to like strengthen the link such that the next circuit you built will be more structurally integral than the first one you built. And I really like that sense of development. Yeah. Like it was much more rewarding than, going in circles trying to find the bug in your code.
No, that's so
and I think that,
No, please carry on.
Like that sense of diversity was really what allowed me to figure out where I wanted to be. Like I mentioned earlier on, it's tough for a year 13 student to say this is exactly where I want to be. But after 2 years in university with that hands-on, that varied kind of experience, you really get to see what kind of field you like. I had a friend who wanted to do civil at first, civil engineering, but now he's gone on to like other things. I think he wants to pursue like information engineering or something like that.
Quite different.
So it's really cool how big, it's really cool how much people jump. Like for me, from like software to hardware, like at least I can see the link, right, between the two. But with my friend, with a lot of my friends actually, they really come to terms with who they are as an engineer. And then they find their home ground and like, okay, this is what I really want to be in the future. And you can say that with a lot more certainty after 2 years of generic education rather than, just coming out straight of your A-levels and having absolutely no idea of where you want to be.
No, certainly, that is one big selling point of the Cambridge course, that you get these 2 like general years to explore, and then going into third year, pick your specialisms. So you are going into third year now. Have you chosen
Yes, I am.
what you're going to be specialising in?
Yeah, so my preliminary modules are electronics and electrical engineering.
Oh, Kel surprise, big shock.
Yeah. But we'll see how this goes. The good thing is they give you like a bit of time to like make up your mind. So you can go for as many lectures as you want in like the first few weeks. And then you confirm your decision before term starts for real.
Nice.
But at least they give you like all of this flexibility. So even now, you know, like I put in my options, but I'm not too sure if I'm making a mistake with one of my modules. At least I know I have the chance to back out and choose something else.
There you go. Nice.
Yeah. So it's not as scary as it sounds. But one downside to this whole general, you know, education method is I had to do papers that I really wasn't good at for 2 years. And that was kind of demoralizing. Like I would keep like trying to study something and I just couldn't grasp it because my brain just doesn't function that way. And then you go to your supervision. Sorry?
Is this your like thermodynamics, did you say?
That kind of thing. Yeah. I was in the sharpest tool in the shed in my thermodynamics supervision. I'm pretty sure my supervisors have cursed at me in their head more than one occasion. But ask my partners, like I was really the one just asking like the most questions because I'm very slow on the pickup for some things and I feel that I'm faster on the pickup for other things. Like some things just come naturally, but other things just don't come to me at all. And I really have to like take the time, you know, you really have to hold my hand through that. And I'm thankful because they do provide the support, right? Like my supervisors are really, really patient, despite my inherent slowness, but they really guide you through the whole process. Like there's no question too stupid for a Cambridge supervisor. That's my main takeaway. And it's really nice, you know, like I think they all appreciate the fact that you're doing papers that you're not exactly good at because you don't have a choice.
Yeah, they know.
And they're more so and you know, like I feel they have a kind of like a motivation to help you out along the way also, because if they want you to specialize in their paper, it makes more sense for them to guide you through the early stages and then, you know, as much as they can sell you to the discipline and convince you to come over to their side. Yeah, there's also an incentive for your supervisors to be nice.
There you go. They want to steal you down the line.
They do need their students, so it makes sense.
There you go. They got to teach someone. Otherwise, they're just sitting here with all their knowledge drinking tea, which, to be fair, they'd probably enjoy more.
Yeah.
I guess that's a like big advantage of the Cambridge like supervisor supervision system. There is always someone on hand when you have what you feel like is a really stupid question. They're there for you. They've got you.
Yeah. I mean, they might laugh at you, but they still got you, you know?
They will answer after they laugh. There you go.
Yeah.
Could you like talk me through what one of your like supervisions may be like?
Okay, so I will speak with this in context with the lectures because I feel the two really go hand in hand, especially with something like engineering. So most of the time, the way things go are lectures will cover something. So, you know, you've got different modules in every paper, right? So let's say you go for one lecture on a specific module. You might have 8 lectures within that one module. So the first lecture might be like an introduction, and then the second one would kind of start with like the calculations proper, and then so on and so forth. And, you know, I would say on average, maybe every 2 to 3 lectures allows you to finish one examples paper. Yeah, so you can kind of like the two of them work like hand in hand. So based off of where you're at in the lectures, you can answer up to a specific question in your examples paper. So what you would do is you would go for the lecture, go back, do the examples paper, and then you would run through the examples paper in the supervision. So if you have any questions, you know, with the examples paper, at least there's someone there to correct you. So that's really how they work. But just a heads up, I personally feel that doing like, unlike, you know, in sixth form where you could just get away with doing your homework, doing the homework alone isn't enough to get you exam ready. There's a whole different element to the tripos, right? You actually need to do past year tripos questions. And sometimes you can really see the difference between examples papers questions and tripos questions. Like examples papers questions are really intended to drill the concept into you. They might ask you something completely left field that you need to draw a lot of connections to, and then like ultimately end up at that answer. Or they might be really, really straightforward just to drive home a certain formula. You know, so it can be one of 2 extremes. Whereas for tripos questions, they're somewhere like in the middle.
What is your tripos? Sorry, could you just explain that term?
So the tripos is like the end of year exam that you take. Yeah, that's what we call it.
At the end of every year, or just at the end of first?
For engineering, it's at the end of every year. I would say in the 3rd and 4th year, that's where things get a bit funky because some papers don't actually have assessments. They're just 100% coursework.
Wow.
So it really depends what modules you pick. But the modules I pick will have assessments. So there's a mixture of assessments and coursework. Yeah. So it's, you would have coursework throughout the year. And then you will have your assessment at the end of the year. But I also want to talk about coursework. So that's the theory side of the house, right? So that's the assessment side. So that's your lecture and your supervision. And labs are a very integral part of engineering at Cambridge. I'm not too sure about how the experience is like in Oxford, but the two also kind of run parallel to one another. So with the theories that you learn in lectures, you actually be able to put them to the test in your labs.
Nice.
So, when you learn about, for example, viscous flow in thermodynamics, you actually get to play with like a wind tunnel, and then like you get to like trip the air into like turbulent flow, and then like experiment with different surfaces to make them viscous, that kind of thing. It's really, really cool. And you like do the calculations. Most of the time, your calculations will match up to what you'd expect, as with most fields of engineering. But it's cool to see them, like fall within that, that order of magnitude. And like, hey, maybe these formula actually do work. It's kind of cool that they actually, can get you to a really close ballpark figure sometimes. Yeah. And it's nice to see the link between the two. Yeah. So that's really the two sides of the house in terms of the Cambridge engineering degree. Yeah.
Nice. Do you spend a lot of time in labs? Is the models you've chosen quite practical?
So I can't speak for my third year because I haven't been through the coursework modules yet. But I can speak for my first and second year. And most of the time you get about 2 lab sessions every week, 1 to 2, if one if you're lucky, but most of the time it'll be 2. And each lab session is about 2 hours. There are 2 kinds of lab sessions. They're short ones, which are really just meant to drive the concept home. You can just finish lab then. And then there are the long ones, which are meant to train your skills as a scientific archiver, for lack of a better word. Wow. So you take down your results and you actually have to write a proper report in which you will get feedback for. And it's a real pain to juggle that on top of your examples, papers and everything. You really have to be on top of it. But it's nice because you really feel that, it's not just all formula. I would say that's the main problem with the Oxbridge engineering degrees. They're they're widely known to be very, very technical and theoretical. So it's largely just calculations, very, very technical theoretical calculations, but not so much of the hands-on approach that, let's say, Imperial has. But you kind of find that's not exactly true after you go through like the whole coursework module. I mean, it's true that we have an emphasis on theory, but it's not like you just study theory alone, right? You're getting quite a fair bit of hands-on engagement also to actually put those theories to good use.
Nice.
But
And do you prefer more of the practical side, or have you found a love for theory this far down the line?
As much as I love the hands-on element to it, I'm a firm believer that there's no reason you should get your hands dirty before understanding what the problem you're dealing with is. So understanding the theory really helps form a basis. And it's funny, like there are some labs where because the lecture hasn't exactly covered the content yet, you just kind of have to dive straight into the practical. And with those, I really feel less confident because I have to figure out what's going on the spot. Whereas if I did the theory first and I have kind of an understanding of what the theory is, I can go into the lab with my eyes open and like, yeah, okay, that's what this is. That's what this is. I'm not too sure what that is, but I can kind of guess because I know what these two are. Yeah. That kind of thing, right? Like you kind of know your place and then you're like, right, whatever I don't know, I can guess.
Yeah. Do you have like an example of a certain topic where that's been the case, where the lecture hasn't covered it and you're going into labs like, what is happening?
Oh yeah. So we did this. We were kind of programming this balance beam to. So it was like a beam with a motor that you can control like its rotation on one axis. So it's kind of like a seesaw, and you have like a ball, like a little like a rolling ball that you put on the rail, and you were supposed to program the code to kind of balance the ball perfectly.
Okay.
So the way you would do that is with negative feedback, right? So you would kind of track exactly where the ball is, and then by negative feedback, you would come to an equilibrium position eventually. And the reason why I can explain this to you so clearly is because I have studied negative feedback. But when I was doing that lab, I had no idea what negative feedback was.
Oh dear.
So we were just guessing everything, like what's a closed loop, what's an open loop, why is there a loop inside of a loop, that kind of thing. And then they stack like 2 loops on top of each other. And you're like, I'm lost.
Are they supposed to do that? Are there supposed to be more on more? Who knows?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
you.
no, but it really helps. It really, really helps if you kind of knew the basics of what was going on. Like, it's one of those labs where like I looked at the handout on hindsight and I was like, yeah, that's so much more straightforward if I actually understood the theory. But it really, really helps to know your stuff before going in. So if you're actually interested in reading ahead, I would recommend reading ahead, although it does take a bit of time. So, you know, like, yeah.
Yeah, speaking of time, I think engineering has a reputation of being quite a, academically intense course. Do you have time for a life outside? Does the Cambridge student have a soul?
I think it's very easy for an engineering student to just get completely caught up in his course. I will speak from the perspective of an international student because I've seen a lot of my engineering friends from like Singapore and like, you know, like international students in general, just cruises of the course. It's a course that you can really do it yourself. You know, I mean, you will have a lab partner, but the big part of the course is assessment, and assessment is individual. So you could really just, you know, be on your own most of the time, and it wouldn't affect your academics at all. But, you know, that's really not the point of going to uni, is it? You know, there's a lot of the social element. Like, there is a life outside the department to be lived.
Stop.
Yeah.
What sort of random claim is this?
I personally felt that I had to go out of my way to do things or to force myself to do things that weren't engineering. Like I told you early on, I decided to stick to rowing. It was something that I picked up in my first term, and I told myself I was going to do this for like one term only and then move on to try like new things. But after that first term, I realized that with engineering, you know, there'll be no incentive for me to try new things, or there'll be less incentive for me to try new things because it's just it's a pretty intense course. There's never a moment where you wouldn't have a thing to do, right? Like if you didn't have a lab report, you probably have an examples paper. And if you don't have an examples paper, there's probably a lecture you should be catching up on. If there isn't a lecture you should be catching up on, there's probably a lecture you should be reading ahead on. So there's really no end to it, you know, at the end of the day. Because it's so diverse, you know, it's so generic that, you know, there's always something that needs to be done. And it's kind of toxic once you get caught up in it all. You really need to force yourself to say, okay, it's fine that I'm behind sometimes. You just got to trust yourself that you would catch up when you need to. You don't need to be 100% on top of it. You can be like 80% on top of it. I think I was like 60% on top of it.
Woo!
But I made it through.
There you
go.
So
it's possible to have a balance. You know, it's an intense course. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. And I feel that if not for the fact that I really invested in like a sport or a club or a society, and I told myself, I'm just going to roll with this.
Yeah.
I can't say for certain that I would have had as much fun as I've had in Cambridge, if not for joining a society.
No.
Yeah. So it really helps to just get out there and commit yourself to something. Because if you have no outside commitments, like I mentioned, you know, work really expands to fill the time that you give to it. So if you've got nothing else filling the time, your whole life in Cambridge would just be engineering. And I feel that's quite of a waste because there's a lot of life that Cambridge has to offer.
No, certainly. Yeah, it's a slippery slope with, I think, Oxbridge degrees in that the terms are so short and there is always something to be doing. How do you maintain that work-life balance is always, you know, a horrible question to try and answer.
Yeah. The way I was brought up, is, you know, like you really got to nail your work-life balance, right? You got to have like a schedule, you got to have a plan, you got to say, okay, I'm going to spend like X number of hours per day on work. And until I finish that quota, then I can go and enjoy, you know, and I literally just threw that out of the window in Cambridge. You know, it's literally just, it's an opportunity cost, right? The time you spend socializing could be spent working, and the time you spend working could be spent socializing. So you really got to weigh your options, right? Like if you have an examples paper due tomorrow, you better not be going out, right? But if you've got the examples paper due next week, for example, right, and you were meeting a bunch of friends for a swap, and if you feel that meeting new people was more worth it, you should go for the swap because there's always time for you to catch up on the examples paper later on.
There you go.
So it's really just like, my advice would be to live by the day. At least that's how I did it. like I would say I'm pretty on about planning. Like I'm a huge fan of planning long term and everything. But when I went to Cambridge, you know, a lot of that just went out of the window because there's just so much. I mean, it's a dynamic environment. You know, you could just get a call on a night that you were intending to study in, saying, "Oh, you want to go for a formal later? I've got a spare ticket." And it's like a formal that you've never been to before. So you're like, you know what? I'm just gonna go. Screw
There
this.
you go. Night done.
Yeah, there's like a real element of spontaneity that I feel you need to embrace when you're in university because you really don't get that elsewhere.
There's something so ironic about an engineer saying, yeah, you just got to be flexible, have no structure, just go with it. I know it. It's such a good lesson though. Yeah, I guess a lot of people place so much emphasis on getting into Oxford and being like super academic, or, you know, to Cambridge. I go to Oxford, so that's my automatic go-to. But yeah, then you get there and it can suddenly be like, oh crumbs, what now? I've got to again. No. So,
and I think like most people who get into like Oxbridge, you know, you've been studying hard for most of your life, right? You're trained to work in a certain way. And then all of a sudden that really just goes out of the window in university. And you've got to be prepared for that because, you know, there's really so much more opportunities and new experiences in universities that you wouldn't be getting, you know, elsewhere, like in adult life or in sixth form. And I would say it'd be a waste to just forego all of that just to keep, you know, your old work-life balance. Like you need to trust yourself that you'll be able to come to terms with a new work-life balance. You know, it might be a bit patchy at the start. You know, you might be late to submit a few lab reports. I almost forgot to attend one of my lab markups because I went up the night before. It wasn't great. It wasn't great, but I was late, but I still made it. You know, but it's these kinds of things that really make your experiences. Like you look back at it and you laugh. You're like, yeah, those are the fun times.
Yeah, this is it.
I shouldn't be saying this, but it is what it is.
Hey, this is the reality. You know, sometimes you're late to a markup. You might miss a lecture or two somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
And it is not the end of the world, hopefully.
It's not the end of the world. Yeah, there's a lot more to live for than just that markup, you know.
There you go. So, looking back now on your time at Cambridge, we're recording this in July 2020, so we are midway through Corona times. It's been a while since
hopefully midway.
Oh, God. Hope not. But yeah, what is something you miss about being at Cambridge?
I really think it's the social aspect. Like not just with friends, also with the course. Like it just feels so weird having a supervision on Zoom.
No, but
you know, like there's so much to that small group experience that you don't get. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I don't really go for my lectures in person. I rely on the online recordings. Like honestly, like I don't want to make my 9 a.m.s. I feel terrible for saying this.
Yeah,
especially if they're recorded. There is no incentive to make your 9 a.m.s if lectures are recorded. Right? Like, and you know, granted the fact that you'll probably be busy with whatever non-academic commitments you may have, it makes sense to plan your lecture attendance around, you know, your free time.
There you go.
Rather than subject yourself to the department's timetable. I feel terrible for saying this, but it is the reality. You know, most students do realize that, you know, there really isn't much of a point going for the lectures halfway through the term. They're like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to sleep in. Life is too short to wake up at 7. No, but it's really the small group elements that you miss, like the supervisions. Going to a professor's room in person with, you know, your shoddily done answers. There's a charm to that, you know, and then when he like laughs at you in person for making a careless mistake, there's really a charm to that. And it's just not the same on Zoom. And also like, you can't do coursework on Zoom. And like I mentioned, a big part of engineering for me is the hands-on aspect. You know, you really miss that. And then on top of that, there's all of that social aspect. You know, your friends, your tutors, the end of year parties. You know, it feels so weird to finish your exams and not have any guided parties to go to. Oh, that sounds so snobbish. But like, I mean, it is part of the experience, right? Especially for me, I've been through, you know, the end of exam season in first year. I knew what to expect in second year. I was prepared mentally and financially. And then all of a sudden, you know, that was gone.
Wow, yeah.
Right, so that feels a bit weird. But it's nice to, you know, I mean, you've got Zoom, you've got Facebook. It's still easy to stay in contact with your friends. It's just not the same.
No, certainly.
It really isn't.
I think words that often come up around Cambridge and Oxford degrees are, you know, you work hard, but you play hard. Do you think that's true?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like, to me, I've come to realize that, you're right, like the work and play are like really two sides of the same coin. Like if you just go all out and you have fun, you feel bad that you're not working. But if you just devote your life to your work, I feel most people will feel bad that they're not socializing enough. Right? I mean, there's no pressure to socialize if you don't want to. But fundamentally, we're all in Cambridge to do well, or Oxford, to do well academically. There's that huge academic aspect to it. At the end of the day, it's really the balance. And the balance for different people will be different. So that work-life balance is really what you want to make of it. I've got friends who are very, very dedicated engineers, and how they can say, oh, I'm not too keen on going out on Wednesday, eludes me. I admire them, for being able to say, okay, I'll join you for a pint, but I'm not going out after because I want to read some paper or something. I'm like, oh, that's next level dedication right there.
That is true willpower. Wow.
Yeah. But, it's different for different people. And I think that's one of the best things that Cambridge has to offer. There's that kind of versatility. Like you can be like super academics focused if you want it to be. You could go all in, with the partying if you also want it to be. But I feel most people find like a happy balance at the end of their first term. It's quite a nice environment.
Nice. Do you think
they're really two sides of the same coin?
No,
they're really, really two sides of the same coin. Yeah.
Do you think you chose right then with Cambridge engineering? Do you think this was the right one for you?
I was just looking back at it. I mean, I really can't speak, for Oxford students or for my friends in Imperial. I have friends in Oxford and Imperial, and they seem to be having a lot of fun too, right? I think it's great. But I don't think I chose wrongly with Cambridge. As to whether it's the best decision for me, I wouldn't be too sure in answering that straight out. Because, I really don't know if I haven't tried the others. But I feel it's a good fit for my working style. Like I really like that flexibility that it affords me, not just on like the work-life balance front, but also on the academic, and the discipline front. The fact that I get to choose from so many modules. The fact that there's a support system there for all of these modules, even the ones that I'm terrible in. It's really great. So yeah, on hindsight, I think it's worth it that I picked Cambridge. I have no regrets. But that could be because I only have experienced Cambridge. Yeah.
Fair. It's a very, very balanced answer. But no, it's great to hear that you are still enthused going into third year. You will be coming back for third year. Exciting.
Yeah. I'm definitely happy. I'm not unhappy with this choice at all.
Nice. And in the future, do you feel like you see yourself becoming an engineer or jumping ship and going into finance, as so many STEM students perhaps do?
So I am on a government scholarship with Singapore. And I've been attached to an engineering agency, which means that I'll actually be doing some good groundwork, at least for the first part of my career, which I think is really nice because most engineers, a lot of the times you tend to just go straight to like project management or consulting. But I feel that there is value in doing things that familiarizes you with, ground operations. You can't be a good manager if you don't know what your workers are going through. And the best way to learn about what your workers are going through is by familiarizing yourself with operations, right? Getting actually down and dirty, with the way engineering is actually done on the ground. And I think that's a lot of things that's a big thing that most university educated engineers lack, that sense of awareness as to what's going on the ground. So there's a bit of that disjoint there. And, I think you really feel this in at least my generation of engineers. My parents' generation, they really didn't want to get dirty because they felt that they moved out of that, third world state. And they really wanted like a first world, true blue, white collar job, right? They want to sit behind the table, and be the ones giving instructions. But now, we realize that the ones giving, especially of all times now, you really see that the people giving instructions clearly don't really know what's going on, right? So there's really a value in actually being able to roll up your sleeves and say, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to get my hands dirty. Let's do this. And I think in the long run, that's really where the future of management is at. We do need managers and, consultants that are actually close to the ground, that actually know or are very personally familiar with the advice that they're giving. Yeah.
Nice. Well, you sound well prepared. Good luck.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Everything's uncertain now, so.
Yeah, well.
I'm just going to roll with it. I'm really just going to roll with it.
There you go. That's what Cambridge has given you. You can just roll with it.
Yeah.
Nice.
I feel like that's been a consistent trend with my whole Cambridge experience. Like, you're really just not prepared for what's up next. I'm pretty sure you can say that's the same for Oxford. Like, you've got an impression of what the university is like in your head.
Mm.
You know, you've got an impression of what the tests and the examinations and the interviews will be like in your head. And then all of a sudden you go for them, you're like, yo, this is not what I was expecting.
You know,
And then you really just become okay with rolling with it. Like that, it's fine if you're not prepared for something. I didn't prepare for this interview at all. You know, but there is value in being, I think Cambridge gives you, maybe probably Oxford also, I can't speak because I don't have experience in Oxford, but at least with the Cambridge degree, you know, and with the course that I've been through, it really gives you that sense of, you know what, I got this. Like, you can really tell yourself that and be okay with everything. Like, the house could be burning around you and you're like, you know what, it's fine.
You know what, I bossed that example sheet last week. I've got this. House burning down.
Yeah, it's fine. You know, I'll figure it out.
Can't be as bad as the ENGAA. There you go.
Yeah, really, yeah. You'll figure it out. I think that's really the charm of the with the Oxbridge education. Like, most of us really have had our lives mapped out. Like, we're very, very certain in what we want to do. And then Cambridge, and you know, my Cambridge experience has really just been, you know, screw that.
Yeah.
Really, screw that, right? Like, there is no certainty. You don't know where you're going to end up. I thought I wanted to do computing. That's completely changed. You know, I say really certainly now that I want to do electrical, but who knows? Maybe next year I'll go for the electrical lectures and find that I hate them too. It's entirely possible I might find a calling in material sciences, for example. I don't know. The option's always there. And it, you know, it's obvious that you can't be prepared for everything, especially in times like these. You know, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Certainly.
You don't know what the world's going to be like in a month's time, in 2 months' time, not to say like in 3-4 years' time when you actually graduate. So, you know, it does help to take that roll of the punches approach. It really does. And I think Oxbridge really, really gives you that.
No, absolutely. That is such wonderful advice to end on. Thank you. And yeah, thank you for talking to us today, Lee. It's been lovely to have you.
Cool, it's been my pleasure.
If you listening would like to learn more about the Oxbridge formula and how you too one day can roll with the punches at Cambridge, we have loads of resources available on our website. A link is in the description below. Our book, also the Oxbridge formula, is linked in the description below, and you can get more student experiences like Lee, what it's like to be at Cambridge and Oxford, on our blog, and they are freely available. You can find us on Facebook at the Oxbridge formula and on Instagram at the Oxbridge formula.